It would be helpful if we could have open before us the passage that was read from 1 Peter chapter 2 and reading again at verse 9. 1 Peter chapter 2 at verse 9. Peter writes to the church and says, "But you," speaking to them as a group in the plural, "but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Dear friends, I urge you, as aliens and strangers in the world, to abstain from sinful desires which war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us." Amen. This weekend we're thinking about teams, and this text speaks about the believers, the church, as a group. If you like, a chosen team and a royal team, and indeed a holy priesthood and holy nation. So we're going to think about that for a few minutes tonight. Two or three headings, the first two coming out of the text, and the final one more of an application. So you plural, are a chosen team, a royal team. That's how Peter addresses the early church. As I said at the beginning of our service tonight, the idea that was being introduced this morning by John MacDonald, explaining the structure of ministry teams, is not at all to junk our Presbyterian church government by general assemblies and presbyteries and kirk sessions and what have you. It's not to usurp the work of pastors, teachers, elders, deacons, but rather to build on all of that and to bring ministry ever closer to our communities and to involve more and more people in those ministries. And that's biblical and that's healthy. And the reason for having teams is that if your church has 20 people in it, we pretty much know everybody and we know who to ask if we're going to do something that involves having fellowship or having food or whatever. There are 2 or 3 people we know well, and we'll see if they're free, and they do it. There are people who are hospitable, that's their gift. There are people who are good at speaking. There are people who are good at leading a Bible study. And we all know who these people are, and we all know who their gifts are if there are 20 people in a church. The same if there are 50, 60, 70 people in a church. Much more difficult if there are 100, 150, 200, 400 people in our church. As churches grow, they need a bit more effort to ensure that ministry is shared in a healthy and helpful and empowering and enabling way. It is so tempting to say, that's my thing, and guard that thing to the last bullet. Stay off, whether it's in the old days we talked about the tape ministry or something like that, or the tea, or whatever it was, or the Sunday school. That's my turf. I clean this church. Nobody else is allowed to clean it. You know what I'm talking about? But it's so empowering to give ministry away, whether it's stuff that's seen and it's up front, or whether it's stuff that's very private and maybe to do with counseling or supporting people or caring for people in their trials or whatever. It may be very hidden, but it is good to share these ministries. Is this biblical? Well, I think so, because this letter written by the Apostle Peter is not written just to 2 or 3 leaders in the church. He doesn't just write to a pastor here, a pastor there, or to an elder here, or a group of elders there. He writes to God's elect, all God's chosen people, scattered and persecuted throughout Asia. And this section that was read by Ed earlier in chapter 2 of 1 Peter, it's all in the plural. Notice verse 4. As you, plural, come to him, the living stone, you also, like Jesus, you are going to be built as God's temple. Jesus is the living stone, but you are living stones being built as a holy, growing temple in him. You, plural, will be offering sacrifices to God because you, plural, will be God's new temple. God has laid in Zion a precious, chosen cornerstone. That's Jesus. But the one who trusts in him, that's you, the church, you will not be put to shame because to you, plural, Jesus is precious. You believe. You are his people, his body. People rejected Christ. He's the stone the builders rejected. He causes many to stumble. But you are to carry that message of Jesus, the stumbling stone, to the world. You are to bring that message to those who reject it. Because you, plural, are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. You didn't used to be the people of God, but now you are the people of God. You are a royal team, a collective, a family. You are a chosen team, and your task is to glorify God by carrying out and discharging your royal responsibilities as the royal people of God, the nation of priests and kings. There is behind these statements that Peter makes a clear echo of the creation of the people of Israel and God's covenant with them at Sinai. The chapter that Peter seems to be remembering and meditating on when he writes these words is in the book of Exodus, chapter 19, when God at a mountain met with Moses, met with the people, gave the law, gave the 10 Commandments, and constituted Israel as his holy royal people, his kingdom of priests. They had some specialized priests, but there's a sense in which all the Israelites were priests. There would be leadership through the likes of Moses and his successor Joshua, and then there would be kings. And they had a particular function to perform. They had a leadership role. Moses had to appoint, first of all, other elders to share that task with them, and that developed into the leadership structures in the nation. The priests and the prophets and folk like Samuel, Prophet Samuel later on, they all had a role. The judges had a role, the kings had a role, and yet over it all, God is king. And God is the center and the focus of it all. There were royal responsibilities for those who find Jesus precious. They are in verse 4, chosen with Jesus. Verse 6 and 7, they find Jesus precious. They've come, verse 9, into God's marvelous light. They've discovered it. So now, as a kingdom of priests, they represent the people to God, and God through them represents God to the people. The kings were doing the same. They were raised up to represent God's rule and to carry out God's will and instructions among the people. This, says Peter, is a dark world, but believers are chosen, not individually just, but together as a people, as a team, as a nation, to shine God's light in a dark world, to be together God's kingdom of royal priests in a world that desperately needs that ministry and that light. So that's the first thing. You are a chosen team. You are a royal team. But the second thing that we have here is that you are a holy team. And you are chosen for God's praises. Look again at what he says there in verse 9. You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God. What for? Why? That you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful life. You are going to declare that you who were strangers to God have become the nation, the people of God. That you who did not have mercy have received mercy, and you're going to show it in distinctive holy living. Verses 11 and 12. We live as pilgrims moving through this world, as strangers, as resident aliens in this world, not putting down our roots among those in sinful rebellion, but living such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds, see your transformed lives, and glorify God on the day he visits us. You are living as those who have received mercy for his praises, to declare his praises, that your lives, your actions, your deeds, your acts of mercy will glorify God on the day he visits us. There are really two parts to the way God's people function as a holy people who live for God's praise. Part one involves your lips. Your lips give praise to God. The way you pray, the way you talk, the way you sing. You are praising God with your words. But that needs to be backed up with your whole life. You need a life that praises God as well. Lips that praise and lives that praise. In the New Testament, worship is a wider concept than what we do liturgically. If you think about worship only as what we say in our prayers, or what we do when we come together for worship, when we sing, when we offer the sacrifice of praise, when we celebrate baptism and communion, that is worship. When we hear Bible teaching and respond to it, when we confess our sins and receive God's peace and forgiveness and blessing, that is worship. But the way our minds are renewed in Romans 12 to lead to new lives that are shaped by God's will for us and not merely by this world, that is also worship. There's a sense in Romans chapter 15 in which evangelism, sharing the gospel with others, was part of Paul's priestly ministry. If you look at Romans 15 verse 16, this is Paul's priestly duty, offering up the Gentiles who heard the gospel through him, who were converted, who believed the gospel. They are like the fruits that are being presented to God on the altar by a priest. It's a worship, temple, liturgical piece of imagery, but what it is describing is that Paul made tents and sold them. And while he did that, he preached and he witnessed and he started churches, and those churches witnessed. And he prayed against darkness and he prayed against demons, and he lived for Christ. He was reconciled to those who were of different nationalities and ethnicities. He was reconciled to believers who had very different styles of personality and lifestyle from himself, but he was reconciled to them. That was his priestly ministry, to get the gospel out, to share his faith was part of his worship. You can think about your calling. Will you be at a desk tomorrow? Will you be in a school tomorrow, either as a student or as a teacher? See that as part of your worship. Are you about to start a new job? See that as part of your worship. Do you have a really difficult, demanding job where it's really hard to be content and cheerful as a Christian? That's part of your worship, to figure out how to be calm and trusting in the Lord in that situation. Are you going through some trial, some difficulty? There's so much in 1 Peter about worshiping the Lord by the way we deal with pain or with trials or with difficulties. Showing gratitude to God. That's part of our worship. Showing contentment in our lives. That's part of our worship. I have to tell you, for me, maybe it's the same for you, grumbling comes easily. Wishing this or that or the other was different in my life comes easily. So easy not to see the blessing and instead to see the thing that's not quite right. But part of the challenge here is that my lips are saying, God, I love you, and God, I praise you. But my life is also saying, God, I am content. God, I am thankful. God, I am your servant. You, plural, are a chosen team. You, plural, are a royal team with royal responsibilities. And you, plural, are a holy team chosen for God's praises. Luther was once asked if how could a shoemaker, a cobbler, show that he was a Christian and show that he praised God. And somebody kind of joked, should you sew little crosses onto the shoes that you're making? And Luther said, no. The way for a shoemaker to show that he's a Christian is to make really good shoes and not to overcharge for them. And people will see the shoes that you made and they'll glorify God and say, there's a good bloke. And do you know what makes him a good bloke? He knows and serves Jesus. And that will apply whether you're a nurse or a dentist or an accountant or a pastor or whatever, that you go about your task with a love for people, a love for God, and frankly, with that Jesus-like humility that is so attractive when we see it. Honesty that is so attractive. Hard work and integrity. Not materialism, but thankfulness. This is how our lives can preach as well. The final thing is to be a team sharing a vision. And I just want to apply what I've been reading to you and meditating on from 1 Peter chapter 2, and to encourage you. I know all the elders and deacons got this book a few years ago, and I hope you all read it and benefited from this book. It's maybe a book that many of you would like to get a hold of and think through. It's very helpful. It's written in the British context. Ray Evans was a church leader in Bedford in England, so it's not written from North America or some other context that might be different from ours. He's been in a small church that grew to be a medium-sized church, that grew to be a large church, that planted other churches. So I think we can learn from a man like that. You heard him speaking to two other church leaders on the little video clip that we watched earlier tonight. And in this book, Ready, Steady, Grow, Ray Evans says many wise things, but something that I've certainly taken from this book is to encourage the whole church to share the same vision, that this is why the church exists. This is what we're for. This is the difference that we wish to see Jesus making in people's lives. We don't just exist for ourselves, but we exist to be a blessing to our community. We want to praise God. We want to share the joy of the Lord with others. We want others to find the Lord. We want to be a blessing. And anything we do, youth ministry, food bank, a toddler group, some season of outreach, season of invitation, things that we do that purely serve others, or things that we do that build up other Christians, it's all with the same vision that we are here to have fellowship with each other, fellowship with the Lord, and to share the Lord and His grace and love with others. How does the discussion from this morning about ministry teams fit into that? Well, let me give you an example, and then I'll be quiet. If my name's on a rota, and twice a year I have to do something because I'm on a rota to do it, then hopefully I'll remember that I'm rotated to go and take a service at Wiva's house, or that I'm rotated to clean the church toilets, or I'm rotated to help lead us singing, or whatever. But I can then forget about it for the other 50 weeks of the year. It's not really a ministry. I'm not taking ownership of something. Now, there's nothing wrong with rotas, and rotas are useful, and teams will have people on rotas. But the whole idea of thinking about ministry, what is my way of serving Jesus? What is my way of serving the body? What is my way of building others up and being built up by others? It gets us thinking about what gift God has given to us, and He has given you gifts, and what calling God is laying upon your life, and He is calling you to glorify Him with your life. And the idea of being part of a team who might have an interest in evangelism or pastoral care or looking after the elderly or whatever it is that it might play to your God-given strengths and your God-given calling. It's not to burden people and say everybody needs to be on every team. It's very unlikely that somebody will be on more than one team. And it's not to smother people with responsibilities, but to empower people and encourage people to be built up. We want to see these teams as things that encourage fellowship. If God builds us in fellowship with each other, then we will be discipling each other. We will be studying the Bible together. We will be sharing meals together. We will be praying together. And we will be thinking, this ministry, I've got an ownership of it. I care about it even when it's not my turn. It's my ministry. And I care about the other people who are doing that ministry with me. And I care about them when they're struggling, and I want to help them so that we all do that ministry better. Toddler group, whatever it is, how can I think about it as my gift to the Lord and my gift to the Lord's people and my gift to my Savior, so that I'm giving of myself and giving of my time and having fellowship with other believers while we're doing it all. So there you have it. We are chosen to be together. A chosen team, a royal team, a holy team, existing for God's praises. Is that the vision that we share? I am persuaded that it is. I am persuaded that it is what God is calling us to do. Father, will you bless to us your word, and will you encourage us to serve you with renewed enthusiasm and gratitude. Help us to live for Christ in our daily calling, in our friendships and families too. May we be known as those who love and serve Jesus. And for anyone who is not yet a Christian, we ask that the Christ who is that cornerstone on which the whole living temple of God grows, that he would make us all living stones in his temple, built on him. Hear our prayers for Jesus' sake. Amen.